Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode 190 of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. It's always a pleasure and it's a privilege to be with you in each and every episode. I record and I prepare with great thought and great consideration in not just the topics or issues that I am discussing, but also in my delivery and trying to find the right words, the right phrasing to illustrate what it is that I'm trying to communicate in each episode, because it's not just me wanting to kind of get my point across, but I believe that if I communicate effectively, then the audience will clearly understand what it is I'm trying to say. And every speaker who puts great consideration into the outcome, that's the desire that the audience really understands what you're trying to say. And, this is an art where art is generally left to the interpretation of the viewer, whether it's pottery, whether it's painting or music. The artist can tell you what he or she is trying to express, and hope that you can observe that expression in that piece of work. When someone is speaking in the manner like I am on a podcast, or someone is delivering a keynote address, it is the desire, and we are successful when the audience understands what it is that we are trying to say. And so I take great consideration before I hit record and produce another episode. And as I said, this is episode 190 of the Nora Speaks podcast. And this episode, I want to talk about transparency. And I was unsure what I was going to actually title this episode, whether I was going to title it Transparency or Exhibitionism, or the transparency excuse. I kind of like the transparency excuse. So let's just say right now, welcome to episode 190. What am I talking about when I am using the word transparency? Transparency is a tool that speakers use, writers use, when they are trying to connect with an audience, when they're trying to connect with the consumer, and in a really great way, transparency can create a bridge of familiarity between the speaker and the audience, and it can create a bridge of comfortability between the speaker and the receiver. When someone reveals something about themselves that may not be known, something that may be a little bit personal, something that the audience can relate to, it's useful and it's beneficial, and it certainly has its purposes. However, can transparency go too far? It can go too far, and it does go too far when the speaker is oversharing, when the speaker is sharing intimate or personal details that can be quite excessive. And we see this very common in our modern culture, where there's a certain oversharing of personal details with the audience. And there's a lot of motivations that people have when they are oversharing. It can be for social media follows, clicks, shares, likes. It could be to sell a product, whether it's someone's book, television show. I mean, let's just look at the reality television industry where there are celebrities. Now, I remember I'm of the age where the MTV show The Real World came out, and I was in high school when that show started, and it was the kind of the first of its kind, where there was a house where I think it was 7 strangers lived in, and we got to watch a great deal of what happened because the cameras were rolling, and it was a certain bit of what's happening behind closed doors with strangers. Now, the idea that they're strangers, that was unique, and then the fact that there was a camera rolling and recording what they're saying and what they're doing, that was also unique. And it was, there's an excitement to that. And now they have upgraded from folks that we may not know in the mainstream to folks we do know in the mainstream. And so we have this celebrity in reality TV culture, and these folks are sharing a lot, saying a lot, and doing a lot. And it gives us a window to observe very private, intimate experiences that people are having. And, that's for ratings. It's not because it's for ratings. And, for those who come on the show, it's to revive a career, whether it's their singing career, their acting career. For some, it's to kick off or expand a career. And so reality television is just one way, but it's certainly, a very prominent example of the oversharing, of the transparency of us watching from behind a camera lens what's happening behind closed doors. And when I say, can it go too far? I believe, yes, it certainly does. And it does too often go too far. If it's a celebrity who's written a book and they are detailing intimate experiences within their marriage, within their relationships, it can have its place, as I said earlier, to connect the audience, connect the consumer with the speaker. It certainly can have its place. It can lay a foundation. I think about, I'm a speaker and I speak with young women, and there's a certain level of transparency that you want them to have. But for me personally, some things I will share are my general demographics. I'm married, I'm a mother. I work outside of the home. And, I may share some things of how I was raised. I may even share some unfortunate experiences, but there are limits. There are boundaries that I don't cross, and there are boundaries that I don't want, anyone crossing with me. And, the purpose of that for me when I'm speaking with the level of transparency that I use, it is to connect those young women to me, and for me to connect to them, to let them know, look, I'm just a black girl like yourself. And the sharing does not go too far. And I'll say that if I have to share very, very intimate and personal parts of my life with someone, with an audience, or with a consumer, then that's just not my audience, and that's just not my consumer. If someone cannot connect with me unless I share something that's extremely painful, that's extremely personal, and the great thing is I get to decide what I will and won't share. For some, the sharing is a means to create shock value, and it's a means to be provocative, where the sharing kind of exceeds the purpose of connection, and the sharing becomes one to create a reaction. And we know with media, the stronger the reaction that you can generate, the more popularity that you will have, the more views you will have, the more shares that your content will have. But it's not because it's quality content. It's because it's so provocative. And so we must consider then the value of what it is that's being shared. Is the value to help others, or is the value to help your own pockets and your own personal profit and gain? In some ways, when you're sharing and it's constructive, then it can be beneficial to you. It could have some level of catharsis for yourself. It can create a good feeling in you when you've connected with someone, when you're trying to relate to them. But I've even seen where speakers go too far, where they're trying to establish a connection and there's a certain level of oversharing that's just insincere. And that insincerity can be detected, especially when you're dealing with young people. They have a meter. They have a sincerity meter. And they can read when you're going from trying to create a meaningful connection to trying to boast, to trying to brag. And so when we think about the value that sharing brings, we also have to recognize the dangers or the harm that oversharing can bring. And now in our modern culture, there's very little that we keep left to the imagination. And, if you know someone personally, whether that's your teacher, whether that's your coach, friends, parents, or if you're talking about celebrities, actors, actresses, singers, we all have a curiosity about how someone else is living and someone else's life. Well, that curiosity is natural, but it should just be that. And for some, they remove the veil of curiosity and they just open their doors very, very wide. And that can create an avalanche where someone who is so used to attention because of what they do or share that's shocking, well, if they want to hold on to that audience, they have to continue the shock, right? So we see them on their social media feeds, and we see them on television. We see them followed by tabloid television shows and magazines, and they continue to be as shocking as possible so that they can retain that audience that they had. But at some point, we find that too gets exhausting. And then they have this pressure because people are always wondering, well, what are they going to do next? And what are they going to do next? And then when you decide, well, I guess I want to be a regular person again, well, that's not what they know you for. That's not what they know us for. And so they're looking for that. And now that person that wants to get back into a normal life, into normal celebrity status, or, it can be hard. And it can be difficult because of the boundaries that we crossed earlier on. And so there's definitely harm in the oversharing. And I think that if we're sincere, then we should think about the value and the good that we want to do with the transparency. And so when I say that, or I said earlier that I was considering naming this episode Transparency or Exhibitionism, because some seem to like the shock. They like the reaction. And that's what an exhibitionist is. It's someone who exposes themselves because they get satisfaction from shocking others. They're getting attention. They're getting clicks. They're getting follows, sales, popularity. They get excited. They get satisfied because of the shock and the reaction that they give others, right? There's exhibitionists who have sexual perversions where they go and they expose themselves to people, right? And I'm not talking about exhibitionists in that way, but in some cases, some of these people who are in front of us in media, they do have a certain level of sexual exposure, but they also just have general personal exposure, and and there's very little value there except for entertainment. And I don't think that's good for entertainment because it sets a stage and it sets a certain level of tolerance. And, I think about the young people who are coming behind us, who are growing up in a culture where we say and share everything. And that's just not healthy. There has to be boundaries. Boundaries are good for us. Boundaries let us know how far we should go. And in some cases, they remind us when we've exceeded limits, when we've exceeded boundaries. And for some, there's a loss of friendship. I don't want to be in a relationship with someone that exhibit some kind of exhibitionist tendencies, that they are just constantly oversharing, because not only are they going to be oversharing their stuff, they're going to be oversharing my stuff. And I don't overshare my stuff. That's not the lifestyle that I have. So those people who engage in that can be very isolating for themselves. So, we have to consider the purpose that we're serving. And, sometimes I think that there's an Oprah effect that's been created because, some of the great interviews that Oprah has done has included questions and prodding celebrities to reveal certain things. And now we see that the more we reveal, the more attention we get, the more interest we have, the more popular we become. And so for some who are interested in making a name for themselves, then they take that and they'll overshare. There's a celebrity, I'm not going to name their names. You can research this, and this isn't something that I'm revealing that hasn't already been shared. But there's a celebrity couple, and the wife, in the promotion of their book, and in the book, they talked about, she talked about how she faked orgasms with her husband. Now, why do we need to know that? What purpose is that giving me or anyone else, except to have some kind of knowledge of her and her husband's sexual behavior and her deceit, him being misled into thinking something was that it wasn't? That serves no purpose. That is harmful. That is, I don't quite understand how he's okay with that. I don't understand how she's okay with that. But are we just going to do it and say, we're going to get more book sales? If we lead with this, then we're gaining more interest in the book that we've written. It's just, it's really disappointing. I think that there are some celebrities that we revere, and there's some that we know the least about, right? We can think about Denzel Washington and his wife Pauletta, right? Look, they're a married couple, and I'm sure that, like any married couple, they experience married couple stuff. I don't want to know it. I'm married. I know that there's married couple stuff. And one of the reasons that we revere them is because we know little about them personally, as it should be. When Denzel is speaking with a group of young actors, then he can share some things that can be beneficial to those young budding actors. If he's speaking with a group of young men, he can share some things about his personal life that can inform the conversation in his intention to help young men. Same thing with the sister. She can share some things as a wife, as a mother, as an artist herself. But we revere them because we know so little about them. So we continue to have that curiosity, and it's nice, and we should have boundaries or limits on how much we know of others. So I just wanted to get on the microphone and talk about this because I think that some have kind of bitten the apple and think that this is constructive behavior, or that this is not unhealthy to be oversharing. And and actually, back to that couple, I wonder if that was actually true, that she was faking orgasms. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but I can't imagine that. I don't know. I don't. But let me move on. I hope that's not true. That she would share something so personal. Maybe she's and they're just doing it like so many people do things because they're just trying to make a buck. They're trying to get attention for the product that they're trying to push, which is their book. But back to the point, oversharing is just unhealthy. And I think that, okay, did they do, is it the idea that this is constructive? And I'll say that it not only is it not constructive, in some cases it can be destructive, that we overshare. And I recall Will Smith talking about writing certain things in his book and talking to his mom and making sure that she was going to be okay, with some things being shared. Now, a person can tell their own story, but even the fact that you're going to include pieces of other people's stories, you consult with them. You make sure that it's okay. You let them know why you want to share this part, not because you're trying to be salacious or scandalous, but because you're trying to be constructive and help other people. And I know everyone's goal is not to help. I get that too. Nor everybody isn't out here trying to save the world like you are. And I get that. I do get that. But I think about the children that some of these people have, children that others have. In the fact that we are guiding or permitting this, or we've permitted this transition in our culture of oversharing. I was I was raised with, what happens in this house stays in this house. You don't go outside talking about, what's going on in this house. I was raised, and many of my peers were, raised to, you don't go and tell all your business. It just wasn't something that you did. There was a certain level of decorum. There was a certain level of integrity and dignity that you had, that you don't just go and tell all of your business. Well, there is certainly a shift now, and we're not only just telling our business, we're trying to tell other people's business. And so we've made tabloids out of our own lifestyles, and social media has given us the tools to make tabloids out of our own selves. And then they incentivize this conduct by allowing for likes and for follows and for shares. And so we think that the more followers we have, the more shares we have, the more clicks and attention that we're getting, then we're actually gaining something. And if we aren't careful, we could be losing a lot more than what we've gained. So there is value in privacy. And listen, this language about, being someone's authentic self. Listen, your authentic self also includes your privacy, right? Your authentic self also includes those things that are happening behind closed doors. That's no one else's business. And there is no mandate that says for you or I to be effective, that we have to share, for you and I to be authentic, that we have to share some of the most personal, intimate, or even painful details of our lives. That is not the case. And I think that we have mislabeled overexposure as transparency. And it's something that I've been giving some thought about, and I wanted to share it here. And I'm interested. What do you think about this conversation? What do you think about transparency? It has its place, and it can be a tool to create a connection, but it can also be a means of exploitation and overexposing ourselves and others. And that's not something that we have to do, not for us to to be effective. And I think a good deal of us have been misled. And I wanted to share my thoughts on that here. So I want to thank you for listening to episode 190 of the Nora Speaks podcast. I'm always grateful to be with you each and every week. And I thank you for the time and attention that you give the podcast. And if this podcast has value to you, I encourage you to share it with others, share it with your friends. I know some share it with their youth groups that they work with, and I'm grateful for that. And if there's any conversation that you're interested in, or a speaker that you're interested in hearing from, or a topic, you let me know. You can email me at nora@noraspeaks.com. That's nora@noraspeaks.com. Until next time, stay in peace. The worst kind of crime has been committed against us, for we were robbed of our desire to even want to think and do for ourselves. We are often pictured by the slave master as a lazy and trifling people who are without thoughts of advancement. I say, this is a condition which the slave master very cleverly wanted and created within and among the so-called Negroes. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, noramahammed.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@noraspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.